People always thought I had the perfect life. A stable job as an accountant, 2 wonderful kids, and a husband who loved me. Or so it seemed. To the outside world, I was the picture of devotion, a practicing Muslim who never missed a prayer. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was struggling. I don't know when the doubts started exactly, maybe years ago, maybe longer. Questions that crept into my mind late at night, questions I could never say out loud. Why does faith sometimes feel like a burden? What happens to people who don't believe the way we do? Are they all destined for punishment? No one had answers that satisfied me. Not my husband Rashid, not the imams I consulted, not even the Quran itself. But I buried those thoughts. After all, I had a family to take care of, a life to maintain. Doubting wasn't an option. Or so I thought. One morning, as I was driving to my daughter's school for a parent meeting, I remember thinking about how tired I felt. Not just physically, but emotionally. It was as if I was living 2 lives, one that looked perfect to everyone else, and another where I was drowning in silence. I didn't know it then, but my life was about to change in a way I could never have imagined. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. This is a story that will challenge everything you believe. Stay with me till the end, because what happened next shook me to my core and revealed a truth I never saw coming. And if this story moves you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It's a story you'll want to share. I thought I had everything figured out. I thought my faith would protect me. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. I was running late that morning. I remember rushing out the door, fumbling with my keys, and barely having time to finish my cup of tea. It was one of those typical days when life felt like a blur, responsibilities piling up, deadlines looming, and never enough hours in the day. My daughter, Lena, had an event at school, and, as usual, I wanted to be there. I wanted to show her that despite my busy schedule, she was my priority. The streets were damp from the early morning drizzle, and the grey clouds hung low, almost pressing down on the city. I wasn't really focused on the road. My mind was everywhere else. On the presentation I had to prepare for work, on the groceries I hadn't bought yet, and, as always, on those quiet doubts I couldn't shake. It was as if they followed me everywhere, whispering questions I didn't want to answer. Then it happened. It's strange how a single moment can change everything. I remember the screech of tires, the sharp sound of impact, and then nothing. No pain, no fear, just an overwhelming silence. I didn't even realize what had happened at first. It was as if time had stopped. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't where I expected to be. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't on the road. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. It's hard to explain, but it was like stepping into a completely different world. Everything felt different. It wasn't just what I saw, it was what I felt. There was peace, an overwhelming sense of peace that I had never experienced before. I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was. The light was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't like the light we see here on Earth. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was soft, warm, and filled with a sense of life. It surrounded me, embraced me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of doubt or worry pressing on my shoulders. Then I saw him. At first, I didn't understand who he was. He didn't look like anyone I had ever seen before, and yet, somehow I felt like I knew him. He was surrounded by this incredible light, so bright, yet so gentle. It was as if the light came from him, radiating love and warmth. And the way he looked at me, I don't think I can ever find the right words to describe it. It wasn't just kindness or compassion. It was love. Pure, unconditional love. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stood there, overwhelmed by everything I was feeling. And then he spoke. His voice was unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't just the sound of it was the way it reached into the deepest parts of me. It was as if every word he said wasn't just being heard, but felt. He spoke with such gentleness, yet there was a power in his words that I couldn't ignore. Amina, he said, and the way he said my name felt like he had known me forever. You have questions, and I have the answers you've been searching for. I don't know how, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I felt completely seen, completely understood. It was like he knew everything about me, every thought, every doubt, every struggle, and yet he loved me anyway. He didn't condemn me. He didn't judge me. He just stood there, radiating love, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to him. I wanted to ask so many questions, but before I could speak, he said something that took my breath away. He said, "You have a choice to make, Amina. But first, you need to see the truth." The truth. That word echoed in my mind. I didn't understand what he meant at first, but I knew, deep down, I was about to face something that would change me forever. And just like that, everything shifted. The light around us grew brighter, and I felt as if I was being shown something I wasn't ready for. But at the same time, I couldn't look away. I felt both afraid and at peace, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing you were safe, but still feeling the wind pushing against you. I don't know how long I was there. Time didn't seem to exist in that place. It could have been seconds or hours. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that something was happening, something bigger than me, bigger than anything I had ever known. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. I woke up to the sound of voices, muffled, urgent, panicked. My eyes opened, and I saw unfamiliar faces hovering over me, their expressions filled with shock and relief. I was back in the world I thought I'd left behind. But I wasn't the same. I knew something had happened, something I couldn't explain, and my heart was racing with the weight of it. I was alive, but I had seen something, someone, that I couldn't forget. And I knew in that moment my life would never be the same again. When I opened my eyes in that hospital room, I thought maybe it had all been a dream, just my mind playing tricks on me after the accident. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. What I had experienced was too vivid, too real. It wasn't just something I had seen. It was something I had felt in every part of my being. In those moments, as I lay there, I couldn't stop thinking about the love I had encountered. It wasn't like anything I had ever felt before. I tried to compare it to the love I had for my children, or the love I believed God had for us. But even that fell short. It was as if this love didn't depend on me at all, on what I had done or not done, on whether I was deserving of it or not. It simply was. For so long, I had believed that love from God was something to be earned. That's what I had been taught, that if I followed the rules, prayed the prayers, and kept my faith strong, then God would love me and accept me. But what I felt in that moment, it was entirely different. It wasn't conditional. It wasn't based on whether I was good enough. It was just there. And that's when I started to realize something. The doubts I had been carrying for years, they weren't just random thoughts or fleeting worries. They were questions I had buried because I was afraid of the answers. Questions about why I had to work so hard to be accepted by God. Why my faith sometimes felt like a heavy weight instead of a source of peace. And now, for the first time, I felt like I had been given a glimpse of what the answers might be. I couldn't forget what he had said to me. You have a choice to make. At the time, I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I knew it wasn't just about the life I was living. It was about something much deeper, something that went beyond the surface of my faith and straight to the heart of it. As I lay there in that hospital bed, memories of the encounter came flooding back to me. His words, his presence, the light, and the truth he had shown me. It wasn't harsh or condemning, but it was undeniable. It was as if every part of my life, every belief I had clung to, was being gently unravelled. Not to shame me, but to show me something better, something truer. One of the things he showed me was how much I had been trying to control my own salvation. I had spent my whole life believing that if I just prayed enough, fasted enough, or followed enough rules, I could somehow earn God's approval. But in his presence, I saw it so clearly, how futile that effort was, how I had been striving for something that could never be earned. He didn't just tell me this, he showed me. It was like watching a film of my own life, seeing all the moments where I had tried so hard to be enough, to prove my worth to God and to others. And then he said something I will never forget. You don't have to strive for what I freely give. Those words hit me like a wave. I didn't have to earn his love. I didn't have to perform my way into his grace. It was already there, waiting for me to accept it. For a moment, I wanted to resist. I wanted to hold on to the teachings I had grown up with, the beliefs that had shaped my life. But then I realized what I was being offered wasn't a rejection of everything I had known. It was an invitation to step into something new, something better. But with that invitation came a responsibility. Before I returned to the world, he gave me a message, a mission. He didn't speak it in a commanding way. It was more like a whisper, a gentle urging. He said, "Tell them about my love. Tell them what you have seen and what you now know to be true." I didn't know what to do with that at first. Me? Share this? I wasn't a preacher or a scholar. I was just a woman, a wife, a mother, an accountant. What could I possibly say that anyone would want to hear? But he looked at me with that same love, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. For years, I had been searching for answers, for meaning, for something to fill the emptiness I felt inside. And now, here it was, right in front of me. When I woke up, I knew my life could never go back to the way it was. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't unfeel what I had felt, and I couldn't ignore the message I had been given. But that didn't make it easy. The love I had encountered, the truth I had been shown, it wasn't something everyone would understand. And as I looked at Rashid and my children, as I thought about the community I had been a part of my entire life, I couldn't help but wonder, how would they react to the woman I had become? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay silent. The love I had experienced wasn't just for me. It was for everyone, and I had to find a way to share it, no matter the cost. I don't know how to explain it, but when I woke up in that sterile hospital room, it was like everything had shifted. My body felt heavy, sore, as if it had just returned from somewhere far away. But there was something else too, a lightness inside me, a sense of clarity, as if I could see the world with new eyes. I didn't fully understand what had happened to me, but I knew something had changed deep within me. The beeping of the machines, the soft hum of the hospital air, it was all so ordinary. Yet I knew, without a doubt, that my life would never be the same. Not just because I had survived the accident, but because of what I had experienced in that place beyond life. I had been shown a truth that couldn't be unshaken, and that truth was going to change everything. Rashid was the first person I saw when I opened my eyes. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock and relief. When he saw me looking at him, he rushed to my side, holding my hand as if afraid I might slip away again. "Amina, Amina, you're alive," he whispered over and over, like he couldn't believe it. I wanted to hold him, to tell him everything that had happened. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized that I didn't have the words. How could I explain something so profound? How could I explain that I had met Jesus, that he had shown me a love so deep and unconditional it left me breathless? Still, I had to try. I needed Rashid to understand. I needed him to see what I had seen. I gathered what strength I had and spoke, my voice shaky at first. "Rashid, I saw him. I saw Jesus. He showed me. He showed me the truth, Rashid. The love, the peace. It's not what we've been taught. It's not about following rules and earning God's approval. It's about accepting his love. It's about believing in the sacrifice Jesus made for us." His expression changed immediately, a mix of disbelief and concern crossing his face. "Amina," he said softly. "What are you talking about? This isn't like you. You've always been strong in your faith. What do you mean by this encounter?" I could see the confusion in his eyes, and it hurt. It hurt more than I could have imagined. Rashid was the man I had shared my life with, my partner in everything. And now, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down at a vast divide between us. I had always been the woman he knew, the devoted wife, the loving mother, the Muslim woman who prayed and followed the teachings we had both grown up with. But now, I was different. I had seen something, felt something that I couldn't undo. "I don't expect you to understand right now," I said, my voice trembling. "But this is the truth, Rashid. This is what I've seen, and I can't keep it to myself." He pulled his hand away, standing up quickly, his face tight with emotion. "Amina, please. You're not thinking clearly. You've been through a trauma. This isn't you. You're confusing things." I watched as he turned away, his shoulders hunched in frustration. I wanted to run after him, to tell him that I hadn't lost my mind, that I wasn't confused. But something in me stopped me. I knew that if I pushed him too hard, if I insisted on telling him everything right now, it would only drive us further apart. So I stayed silent, watching him leave the room, knowing that I was standing on the edge of something much bigger than just this conversation. The days that followed were harder than I ever could have anticipated. Word spread quickly through the community that something had happened to me, that I had died and then returned. And with that came the questions, the whispers. People came to visit, but their expressions were filled with doubt, with skepticism. "So, you're saying you saw Jesus?" one of the women from the mosque asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Amina, this is not what we believe." I tried to explain again, but every time I did, I felt like I was speaking a foreign language. The more I shared, the more the gap between me and everyone else seemed to widen. It wasn't just that they didn't understand. It was as if they were afraid of what I was saying, afraid of what it meant. My neighbors, who had known me for years, looked at me like I was a stranger. Their faces were filled with concern, but it wasn't the kind of concern that came from love. It was the kind that came from fear of what I had become. "Amina, you've betrayed us," one of the men from the mosque said one evening as he came to speak with me. His words were harsh, his tone cutting. "You've turned your back on everything we stand for, on your family, on your faith." The weight of his words hit me hard. Betrayal. That was how they saw me now, and it wasn't just the man from the mosque. Others said the same things in hushed voices, some even avoiding me entirely. I felt like I was losing everything. My husband, my friends, my community, all of it slipping away as I tried to hold on to the truth that had been revealed to me. But even as the rejection and isolation pressed down on me, a part of me stood firm. I had been shown a love that was greater than any fear, any rejection. I couldn't turn away from that, no matter the cost. I spent hours in my room, praying, reflecting on everything I'd experienced. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became of one thing. I couldn't go back. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't erase the love and peace that had filled me. And I knew, deep in my heart, that I had to share it, even if it meant losing everything. It felt like the world was shifting beneath me, constantly moving, always out of reach. Every step I took in this new direction seemed to pull me further from everything I once knew, but at the same time, it brought me closer to something I couldn't explain, something I couldn't resist. After the accident, after everything I had seen and felt, I knew I couldn't go back. But how could I move forward? How could I embrace this new truth when the people I loved, the life I built, were falling apart around me? I started by reading the Bible. At first, it was difficult, almost painful. I felt like I was reading words that had always been there, but had never spoken to me before. The scriptures were foreign in a way, but they were also filled with the comfort I had been craving. I began to see Jesus not just as a figure in a book, but as a real person who understood me, who had walked through pain and rejection just like I was now. Every passage I read, every verse I absorbed, seemed to reaffirm what I had felt in that light-filled place. The love I had encountered there. It wasn't just a fleeting feeling. It was truth, and I couldn't deny it. So, I started attending Christian gatherings. At first, I went quietly, sitting at the back, unsure of what to expect. The church was different from anything I had known. The people were kind, warm, and welcoming. I could see it in their eyes. They weren't afraid of my questions or my past. They were simply glad to see me, to hear my story. I remember the first time I was invited to share what I had experienced. My hands shook as I stood in front of them, but as I spoke, something inside me shifted. The words came more easily than I expected. I spoke of Jesus, of the unconditional love he had shown me, of the truths he had revealed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel alone. I felt understood, but there was no escaping the tension back home. Rashid's silence was unbearable. He no longer shared my bed at night, nor did he sit across from me at the dinner table without an air of distance between us. He still didn't understand, and every day he made it clear. "Amina, you've changed," he would say, his voice cold. "I don't know who you are anymore." It was as though the man I had spent years building a life with was now a stranger, and the reality of that truth hit me every time I saw his face. But despite the pain of his rejection, there was something inside me that couldn't let go of the love I had found in Christ. Jesus didn't reject me. Jesus had shown me what love really was, what it truly meant to be accepted, even when everything in the world seemed to be falling apart.
I would try to talk to Rashid about it, about my journey, about my new understanding of faith. But each time, the conversation would end the same way. He would shut me out, saying I was just going through a phase, that I would come back to Islam once I came to my senses. But I didn't want to go back. How could I? How could I turn my back on the love I had felt, the truth I had encountered? One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, I sat with my daughter, Mariam, on the couch. She had been quieter than usual lately, her eyes searching mine as though she were trying to piece something together. "Mom, what's going on with you?" she asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the same. You don't talk the same. You don't pray the same. It's like you're different." Her words cut through me. I wanted to tell her everything, to explain how I had encountered something so powerful and beautiful that it had changed the very core of who I was. But how could I make her understand? She was just a teenager, still grappling with her own identity, her own faith. "I'm still me, Mariam," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But I found something, someone, who has shown me a love that I can't explain. Jesus. He's changed me, and I'm not the same person I was before. But that doesn't mean I don't love you, or that I don't want to be your mom. It just means I've found a new way to love, a new way to live." She sat back, her brow furrowed, clearly deep in thought. "But why Jesus, Mom? Why not stay with what we've always known?" I felt a lump form in my throat as I tried to find the right words. "Because, Mariam, he is the truth. He is the way, the light, and I couldn't ignore what I felt in my heart." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she seemed to retreat into herself, her thoughts spinning. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the confusion. She was torn between the faith she had always known and the mother who now stood before her, a mother she no longer recognized. My younger son, Hassan, was too young to fully understand what was happening. He still saw the world through innocent eyes, without the weight of complex beliefs pressing down on him. He noticed the tension, the awkward silences, but he didn't have the words to express his confusion. He simply asked, "Mum, why don't you pray like we used to?" His simple question broke my heart in ways I wasn't prepared for. How could I explain to him that the prayers I had once offered with such devotion no longer felt like the path to the God I had encountered? At night, when I knelt to pray, I would whisper the name of Jesus, the name that had become my hope, my salvation. It was then, in those quiet moments, that I truly felt his presence, the peace that passed all understanding, the comfort that no amount of rejection could take away. I was on a journey, a difficult, painful, and often lonely journey. But it was mine, and it was real. The first night alone in our empty house was the hardest. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of my own decisions pressing down on me like a stone. Rashid had left, taking Mariam and Hassan with him. They were at his family's house now. The children, my children, were with him. I couldn't even say goodbye. It felt as if I had lost them all at once. I could feel the absence of their laughter, their voices, the simple everyday moments that had once filled our home. And yet, I knew I had no choice. I had made the choice to follow the truth I had discovered, no matter the cost. Rashid's last words echoed in my mind. "You've abandoned everything, Amina. Your faith, your family, your values, all for a lie." He had stormed out in anger, his eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. It crushed me to see him that way, but I couldn't go back. I couldn't turn away from what I had learned. I understood his anger, but I couldn't deny the overwhelming sense of peace that had come over me when I embraced Jesus. That peace didn't come from following the rules of a religion. It came from knowing that I was loved unconditionally, that I was accepted, no matter my past. But now, the cost of that love was becoming clear. The following days were filled with silence and isolation. I tried to reach out to my friends, the ones who had been so close to me, the ones I had once shared everything with. But my calls went unanswered. Texts remained unread. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had been cut off from the world I had once known. Every day, I saw the judgments on their faces, heard the whispered conversations that stopped as soon as I walked by. I had become an outsider in my own community, a person to be avoided, even feared. At work, the isolation was just as painful. The subtle glances from my co-workers, the awkward silences whenever I walked into the room. It was as if I had become a pariah. My boss, a man who had always been kind and professional, started finding reasons to give me less work. When I finally asked him about it, his response was cold and dismissive. "Amina, you've changed. I don't know what's going on with you, but I can't keep you on the team if you're not going to be a part of the company culture." I felt the weight of his words. I had worked hard for this job, built a career I had been proud of. But now, it seemed like my faith had cost me that too. The worst of it, though, was the guilt I felt for my children. The ache in my heart grew sharper each day as I thought of them. Rashid had taken them away from me, and I couldn't blame him for it. How could he understand? How could he accept what I had done? I could see it in his eyes. He thought I had betrayed everything that mattered, and by doing so, I had hurt them too. Mariam was older now, and I could see how confused she was. Her rebellious silence said everything. She was torn between her father's world and mine. Every time she looked at me, I saw the confusion in her eyes, the pain. She didn't understand why I had chosen this path. She didn't understand why I had to let go of everything I had ever known. I could feel my faith wavering as the weight of the loss pressed down on me. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be firm in my conviction, but the emptiness inside was becoming unbearable. Every prayer, every moment of reflection brought me peace. But it wasn't always enough. I would sit in my quiet house at night, alone in the stillness, and wonder if I had made the right choice. The memories of my family, their laughter, the simple joys of our shared life, kept haunting me. Had I been wrong? Had I made a mistake that I couldn't undo? Was following Jesus really worth all of this? But deep inside, there was a voice that would not be silenced. It was the same voice I had heard in that moment of light, that voice of love that had embraced me in my darkest hour. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, even if it felt that way. Even if I had lost everything, I had gained something far greater. I knew the cost. I had felt it in every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of longing for the life I'd once known. But I also knew that the love I had found was worth it. One afternoon, after a particularly hard day, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of the woman who had changed so much. The woman who had lost her family, her career, her community. The woman who had chosen a path that felt, at times, like an impossible road to walk. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly. But in that moment, I felt the quiet strength of Jesus surrounding me. His love was constant, unshakable, and that was enough. It had to be. I couldn't undo the past, but I could move forward, one step at a time, with faith in my heart. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was still filled with obstacles that felt insurmountable. But I also knew that I wasn't walking it alone. And in that moment, I found the courage to keep going. It was strange to think about, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose. As I sat at the small desk in my dimly lit room, the words began to flow. I hadn't written in years, not since my early days as an accountant, and certainly not like this. But now, everything felt different. The pain, the loss, the isolation. They were all still there, but they were no longer defining my life. What defined me now was the message I had received, the message of love, grace, and the transformative power of Jesus. I started small. I didn't have any grand plans or a platform. I simply began writing about my experience, the moments of light, the words that Jesus had spoken to me, the way my heart had been opened to a love I had never known. I didn't want to focus on condemnation. I didn't want to criticize my form of faith or the people I had once shared it with. They were all just doing what they thought was right, the same as I had. But the truth I had found was undeniable, and I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. As I wrote, I reflected on the teachings of Jesus and how they had changed my perspective. It wasn't about what you could do for God or the rules you followed. It was about what had already been done for you. That was the heart of the message. It wasn't about perfection. It was about grace. I began to attend small Christian gatherings, more for myself than for anyone else. At first, it felt uncomfortable. I was still a stranger to this world, still finding my place among people who had been walking their faith for much longer than I had. But every time I listened to the words of others, I felt more at home. I felt more whole. Jesus had said that he was with us, always, and in those moments, I truly believed that he was. I started sharing my story, cautiously at first. In those quiet gatherings, in small, intimate settings, I spoke of my experience, the car crash, the moment of light, the encounter with Jesus. I didn't expect anyone to believe me immediately, but I hoped they would listen. I spoke of how I had found peace in the love of Christ, how he had shown me the fallacies of the beliefs I had once held dear. But I made sure to emphasize one thing. This was not about condemning anyone or anything. It was about love. I told them about the profound peace I had felt in Jesus' presence. It wasn't a peace that came from following rules, from performing rituals. It wasn't a peace that came from earning my way into heaven. It was a peace that flowed from knowing I was loved, not for what I did, but for who I was. That was the heart of the gospel. That was the heart of Jesus. And I wanted others to know that too. Over time, I began to feel the impact of my words. It wasn't immediate, but it was real. I saw the way people listened, how their eyes softened when I spoke of the love I had received. Some of them seemed hesitant, unsure, but they were listening, and that was enough. I wasn't trying to change anyone's mind in a single conversation. I was simply sharing the truth I had discovered, the truth that had changed my life. One woman, Karen, came to me after one of the small group meetings. She was a quiet person, always sitting at the back, observing rather than participating. But that day, she came to me with tears in her eyes. "Your story," she said softly. "It made me question everything. I've been going through the motions of my faith, but I've never really felt this peace you talk about. It's like I've been trying to earn it, but what if it's just a gift? What if it's already been given to me?" Her words took me by surprise. I had never expected to see such a reaction. I hadn't expected anyone to be moved by what I had gone through, let alone question their own beliefs because of it. But that was the power of sharing your story. The truth, when spoken with sincerity, had a way of reaching hearts in ways you couldn't predict. And that was all I wanted. I didn't want to be some great preacher or evangelist. I didn't want to force my beliefs on anyone. I simply wanted to share what I had found. The love of Jesus, the grace that had saved me, the freedom that came with it. I wanted others to know that they didn't have to live in fear or guilt. They didn't have to wonder if they had done enough or been good enough. Jesus had already done it for them. In the months that followed, I continued to share my story. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if it was all worth it. The rejection from my family and community still stung. My children, especially Mariam, were still struggling to understand why I had made such a radical choice. But I could see the impact my words were having. More people began to approach me after meetings. Some of them were curious, others were deeply moved, and a few seemed hesitant, unsure if they could truly accept the love I spoke of. But no one could deny the sincerity in my eyes. No one could deny the transformation that had taken place in me. I learned not to rush the process. I learned that faith wasn't about convincing people or forcing them to accept something they weren't ready for. It was about planting seeds, about showing others the love that had been shown to me and letting them explore it for themselves. One evening, after a particularly emotional meeting, I sat alone in my room, reflecting on everything that had happened. My heart was filled with gratitude, not for the success of my mission or the recognition of others, but for the love I had received, the love that had made all the difference. And I realized, in that quiet moment, that this was the mission I had been given: to share the love of Christ, to speak of the grace that had transformed me, and to invite others into the same freedom. That was my calling, and I would continue to walk in it, no matter the challenges, no matter the cost. It had been months since Rashid left, months filled with heartache, loneliness, and an endless search for answers. I spent many nights crying, questioning whether I had made the right decision, wondering if my family could ever heal from the rift that had torn us apart. But as time passed, I began to feel a sense of peace that I couldn't explain. It wasn't the peace of having everything fixed or back to normal. It was the peace of knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing what I was meant to do. I didn't expect a miracle, but I never stopped praying. I prayed for my family, for my children, and for the community that had rejected me. I prayed for Rashid, that one day he would see the love and truth that I had found, even if it wasn't today. And then, one afternoon, the knock came. It wasn't the kind of knock that I expected. I had thought it would be a letter or a phone call, a distant message from someone still holding on to the past. But it was Rashid, standing at my door, holding Mariam's hand. Mariam wanted to come with me, Rashid said, his voice softer than I remembered. His face was etched with lines of stress and wear, but there was something different about him, something open. I blinked in disbelief, not knowing whether to hug him or step back in hesitation. It had been so long. I had missed them, more than I could ever admit, but I wasn't sure what this visit meant. Mariam looked up at me, her eyes filled with both confusion and curiosity. She had been quiet these past months, and I knew it was because she was struggling to understand everything that had changed. Rashid might not have fully embraced the faith I had found, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe he didn't understand everything, but he had come, and that was something. "Are you okay?" Mariam asked tentatively. "I mean, I've been thinking, maybe there's more to this than what we've always been told." Her words hit me like a wave of relief. I could see the seeds of doubt she had been grappling with, and they were the same questions I had once faced. But this time, it wasn't me trying to convince her. It was her reaching out, seeking answers in her own way. "I've been reading a lot, Mum," she continued, looking down. "And I don't know. Some of the things we were taught, they don't make sense anymore. I don't know what's right, but I want to understand. My heart soared. It was the first glimmer of hope I had seen from Mariam. She had been so angry, so hurt, but now I saw the light of curiosity in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path to reconciliation after all. Rashid's gaze softened as he looked at me. I can see the change in you, he said quietly. I don't know if I believe the same things you do, but I can see the peace in your heart. You've changed, Amina, and maybe there's something to that. I nodded, the tears that had been threatening to fall finally making their way down my cheeks. I know I've hurt you, Rashid, and I know you don't understand my choices, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. This faith, this love, it's not about religion, it's about peace. And I want you to know that I'm still the same person. I haven't left you. I've just found something that gives me strength to love even more. We stood there in silence, all of us holding onto something unspoken, something fragile yet powerful. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. It was the start of healing, a seed planted in the midst of pain and loss. And it was enough. In the following weeks, Rashid didn't fully embrace my faith, but he did begin to soften. He started joining us for dinner on Sundays, sitting at the table while we prayed before meals. He never bowed his head, never said the words, but he listened. And sometimes, when he looked at me, I could see a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. Mariam, too, began to ask more questions. We spent evenings talking about what I believed, about the love of Christ, about the freedom that came from knowing Jesus. She wasn't ready to make any decisions, but I saw her heart slowly opening, a far cry from the resistance she had shown before. And though there were still challenges, still moments when the weight of my decision felt heavy, still times when I questioned if I had done the right thing, there was also an undeniable sense of joy in my life. My story, my testimony, was reaching others. People in my small Christian community started asking questions. They began to share their struggles, their doubts, and I found myself offering the same comfort I had received. The peace of knowing that no matter what, God loved them, that Jesus had died for them, and that love was enough. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. I've lost so much, and yet, in a way, I've gained everything. The peace that seemed so elusive before is now my constant companion. The joy of knowing I'm loved, not because of anything I've done, but because of who I am, has changed everything. I'll always carry the pain of the choices I made, but I also carry the hope that others too can find the truth. The truth that Jesus is love. He is grace. He is freedom. And that truth is worth everything. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I've been called to share this message, no matter the cost. Because when you find the truth, you can't keep it to yourself. If you're watching this, I encourage you, don't let fear or doubt keep you from seeking the truth. Don't let your past hold you back from experiencing the peace that only Jesus can give. Love, real love, is waiting for you. And no matter where you are in your journey, know that redemption is always possible. Take the first step. Seek the truth. And know that you are never alone. As I finish this story, I pray for my family, for my community, and for all those still lost in darkness. I pray for their hearts to be softened, for their eyes to be opened, and for them to know the peace and joy I have found. May God guide us all toward the truth and the love that sets us free.